So I have to make first an introduction and say that I started with the title Interior Design in the Climate Change Context. And then I went out of that area and I arrived at ideas, examples, and inspirations, because I am an architect, and we as architects know that actually architecture is about the larger scale as about the smaller scale, from the territory to the city to the buildings to the inside of the buildings and to the objects inside of the buildings. And so I will have to give examples from all these areas. I will start with the context and just emphasize the fact that not long ago, there was this pivotal moment in which the man-made environment outgrowed the natural environment. In a sense, you have this image which tells a lot. And actually that created that that's a threshold that signifies the fact that man has occupied so much of the surface of the earth and has developed such a strong presence that nowadays we really put in danger a lot of natural ecosystems. There's a great loss of biological diversity, and natural systems all over the planet are endangered and suffer. I must start with the bad omen of the crisis. We more or less every day experience some type of crisis on a global level or local level, environmental, war, pandemics, financial crisis, social crisis. Each and every day we hear news about such signs of imbalance. We need to regain balance. We need to manage better our lives. I have these two images that I use in some of my presentations to illustrate the idea that up until quite recently, we imagined that our future would be a never-ending progress, very bountiful dinner table at which we can each of us choose whatever we want. A lot of good things. Everyone has the right to express his individuality and personal taste. And when a crisis comes, then you have the image on the right. What was considered normal, a simple chair, becomes a luxury, becomes an item that is vulnerable and fragile. And I think we have to rethink, reset our minds in order to achieve resilience. That's a very much used word nowadays. And I think there's a need to change the strategy and the approach. And that means that global issues are global, and so they need globally applied solutions. And on the other hand, if we think in those terms, we might say, well, what can I do at my own personal humble level? How can I affect the global balance? And the answer is yes, every action counts. Everyone is affected. Everyone can do something about it. Another idea would be that simply applying preservation and sustainability principle is no longer enough. We need to take action for restoring and regenerating natural environments. And we can do that even within our urban structures. We can do that. And then I might stress about three major axes. We need to be more responsible. We need to collaborate, and we need to innovate. I think these are the main three axes of what we can do starting from now. And this is the image of regenerative design, what we can do beyond sustainability. I will not get into details, but I think it's useful to do that. And then I go to several examples. Please bear with my rather informal approach. I am not as pragmatic and scientific as my young colleague that made the presentations before me. I tend to be inspired and enthusiastic about all sorts of ideas, and so I wanted to bring them to show them to you. About recycling, reusing, adapting what we have, I think the interesting grain of salt would be to play. Kids are free in their games, in their play activity. I think we should be free when we generate new ideas, when we try new things. And I think this direction also responds to a human need that is quite present nowadays, the human need for identity. We need to have our own personal identities reflected in the objects and the interior space inside which we live. And so this current for sustainability would allow our imagination to experiment and play, and our identity to express through these choices. We all know there are several concepts, recycling, upcycling, downcycling. They are interesting concepts, the idea being that every object should be given a new life. It's like, this broken piece of furniture should not be thrown to the garbage. It should be reinvented, refurbished, transformed into something useful and fun. And so we might do a lot of combinations, keep the toys we found in the attic, transform a humble piece of wood, use part of a car that no longer is functioning. And all these elements can transform into useful and playful and interesting objects to surround us with. An interesting concept in design is cradle to cradle. That's an applied principle of the circular way of doing things. Instead of, if you make the comparison with human life, instead of growing from childhood to old age and then die, an object should be reborn after the end of his life cycle. When it is no longer in use, instead of throwing it away, you dismantle it and reuse its part. And so this principle of cradle to cradle design is based on three ideas derived from nature. Everything is a resource for something else. In order to be true to these principles, you have to use clean and renewable energy. I mean, what's the use if you burn? Of course, you can reuse an old piece of furniture by burning it. Is it really correct? Is it really useful? Is it the only thing that you can do? So please use clean and renewable energy. And also celebrate diversity. You cannot apply the same methodology, the same rules, the same elements to any action, to any context, to any activity. You have to adapt and accept diversity. Sustainability in interior design. A few directions, use of sustainable materials, and that means what I was talking before, thinking about the life cycle of the product, and in terms of marketing, the life cycle of the product ends when the product is sold, and then the marketing people don't need to intervene anymore. The truth is that the life cycle of the product is much longer. We have to think of what is happening while the product is in use. We have to think about the maintenance costs, the repairs that it might need, and what happens when the object is no longer useful. What do you do with it? And then another direction would be this applying sustainability concepts to this longer life cycle, as I said, and to more areas of our human life as global environmental and psychological impact, because we balance between pragmatic approach, we think about efficiency and money and gain what we gain from this or that. The truth is that we need our psychological comfort. We need our psychological dimension to be served also by what we do. And so we need to value the individual and collective stories. We need to preserve tradition. And we need to think also in terms of psychological well-being, collaboration, living well with others. I got here some examples of some green interior designs. The one on the lower right is, let's say, more traditional pieces of furniture that resemble what we know and what we use. It's obvious that the use of natural materials is a very important thing. And also the simplicity, not overcrowd, not over decorate the elements. So one very important aspect of the interior design that is sustainable is the use of natural light. It's extremely important. On the upper corner, we have another example, which is futuristic, let's say, but it shows a few ideas that are very present nowadays. We all love to have a lot more greenery inside our homes or our offices. That's a common trend that is affecting us, and I think the pandemic reality just enhanced that need for greenery, for living organism that would come together with us inside our homes. Biophilic interior design. Biophilic is, in fact, the love for what is life, what is for all living creatures. Plants, animals, humans, we should live harmoniously together. And this is an example of such a biophilic approach in interior design. It's an American hotel, Brooklyn Bridge Park, that won the Best of Year Boutique Hotel Award in 2017, just before a few years before the pandemics. So that is to prove that this trend was already very present. I gathered here some images that show how big the moments of transition in our changes in lifestyle can be. Here lower right, we have a traditional armchair, specific to British clubs. You go there, you just sit comfortably, read your paper, drink your whiskey, and the armchair is made out of leather and so on and so forth. And next to it, there is a very rebellious armchair, proposed by the young designers in the 70s, made out of inflatable plastics. Then we have the famous 3D print revolution nowadays, and what that type of technology might bring in the structure and the shape of our furniture objects. Instead of having a very heavy sofa or armchair, we can have a very comfortable, light, and elegant structure, 3D printed, as you see in that image. And I think the next step, already possible to be made, is this idea of pieces of very comfortable pieces of furniture that levitate. And that is also, if we look at these images, there's also this tendency towards less material. One trend also very present, dematerialize, use less and less material, and that could bring a lot of interesting evolutions. Lifestyle changes, we experienced some very abrupt changes in our lifestyle because of the pandemic's lockdown. And so a lot more people worked from home and had to adapt their interiors for this type of activity, with all the problems that came with that. Another very complicated issue was to ensure the needed social distancing by using furniture and architectural elements. And I can tell you, I forgot to say that I'm a teacher at the Mink University at the Interior Architecture faculty. And during the 2 years of the pandemics, some of our students in the design faculty chose subjects in relation to these new requirements generated by the pandemic. And I can tell you it was easy. And actually, it was quite an effort to adapt some furniture items or some protective products, such a mask, to the needs required for the COVID spread, and then make them useful after such danger is past. Another trend already present and also enhanced by the pandemics was the need to live outdoor while the weather is good enough. We all love to stay outside, not inside our homes. Another lifestyle change that is quite present is to transform our choices of materials, change the products from natural leather to man-made leather. There are developed a lot of new solutions to that, from ananas leaves, all sorts of natural materials that can be transformed into products that are very much alike natural leather. And this direction of eco-consciousness, I think, is very important and will be present many years from now. In times like these, in which we are forced to abruptly change, there's a lot of nostalgia as well. We need to compensate We need these areas that would help us adapt to these rapid changes. And so these new products that I presented here illustrate this idea. The materials might be new, the solutions might be new, but the general shape is like what we were familiar with. Bio-inspiration, that is a very interesting direction in object design as well. And I think that's a very valid approach because in nature, in, I don't know, millennia of evolution, there were very interesting solutions, adaptation solutions that were developed in specific biological systems. And by studying all those solutions and trying to understand the mechanisms, the elements that make them work, give us very valuable ideas. And here you have some examples of furniture that are inspired by the biological systems. There are several conflicting, so to speak, forces that compete for our attention. The fascination for the virtual, artificial, man-made environment. And on the other hand, the need for having next to us, to feel, to touch, to have in our rooms natural materials. And that wood, I think, would still be a very dear reference, natural reference for all of us. And so natural materials are, of course, as authentic and precious. They have very different and very specific texture. It can be enhanced or showcased by using different shapes and finishes. On the other hand, there are several natural materials that are being reinvented, reused, transformed, such as the natural materials fibers. On the other hand, the new technologies combined the 3D printing, the type of 3D pleating specific to the Japanese culture, or the combination between natural materials like in this image here, can offer very interesting solutions to the objects around us, namely furniture objects. And now, just to remind us some the difference between sustainable, eco-friendly, green materials and technologies. Eco-friendly means respect to the balance of the ecological systems around us. We don't want to harm them. We don't want to put them in danger. Green materials mean that we don't, again, harm the natural environment in terms of more about regenerable resources. And sustainable, as we all know, means that we have the responsibility of not, on one hand, consuming all the resources now and not leave enough resources for the next generation. And on the other hand, to think about the effects our activity will have on the longer term. And so what would bring that to the interior design? What would be then the sustainable interior design is the practice of minimizing of the use of non-renewable resources, material or energy, eco-friendly products and methods. In terms of architectural solutions, we would prefer to have some solutions of passive design that would not necessarily need use of energy to improve the functioning. Of course, nowadays, for example, here in Romania, we have a terrible drought and high temperatures. And now more than ever, we become conscious about the value of water and how important it is not to waste it and to use it well. We need to find ways to improve indoor air quality, to increase comfort, because we became creatures of comfort. We want a lot of elements of comfort in our interiors. Well, nobody says we have to abandon the idea of living comfortably, but we do have to find ways to achieve that comfort with very little negative effects on the longer term. And please remember the idea of the psychological comfort that is very important. In terms of cost, we now tend to pay more attention to the cost of maintenance. And up until very recently, we used gladly products that would be used and then thrown away. Nowadays, we tend to go back to the idea that we should buy some product and then use it for years, and then there should be some structure that would help us maintain and repair that item. And I think that could be adapted, that could integrate the idea of technological progress if we could think, I don't know, like a vacuum cleaner, if we could rethink it as a product that is mainly an engine and some parts, then we should be able to adapt and upgrade the engine and change some of the other parts in order to allow the vacuum to have a longer life, as well as enhanced quality. And on the other hand, I think that there's a lot of place for applying the creativity of the designer and putting the personal stamp on what we do. New materials, 3D printing, this is aerogel. It's a very light material developed for the outer space spaceships, and of course the newest materials are developed in the aerospatial and armament industry, and later on they are delivered to the public to apply into more domestic uses. And I think applying these new materials and technology has to be done with a lot more responsibility. Green interior design means energy efficiency, resource conservation, and the keen observation of our health parameters. Renewable energy sources might be solar, wind, thermal, hydropower, wave, and tidal power. And what's interesting is that these green solutions are obviously adapted to the local conditions, and therefore they are very diverse and interesting. On the other hand, there are several elements that go and apply for everyone. For example, the new technology for lighting means high performance and low energy consumption. The cost of the LED lamps is very low, and so you can apply them easily all over the globe. We tend to understand and reuse and combine traditional ways of ensuring natural ventilation and combine that with mechanical ventilation in order to create a good air quality inside our homes and also not to lose too much of the heat. We need to apply newer sources for bringing us heat inside the home. We use solar, wood, or biofuel. And of course, the intelligent use of natural light is also, as ever, important. Again, the three main axes: environmental, economic, and social. We do have to remember that social sustainability is key. We cannot. I want to express one idea that I have for some time now. I think we are living an interesting era in which the general perception is changing, and I think up until very recently, the Western culture said, well, the individual is key, the competition is the way to do things. And nowadays, that is slowly changing towards we can really win only together. Instead of competition, collaboration is key. And of course, that goes well with social sustainability. We cannot have a fulfilled life in our city if the city has areas that are with conditions that are not correct. And social upheaval is always a risk. We need to have equity and good life quality for everyone. I was very glad to see that, for example, in architecture, the equivalent of the Nobel Prize is the Pritzker Prize. And in 2019, there was the Pritzker Prize allowed to some French architects that actually got the prize for this intervention. As you can see it here, this is an old block house for social apartments, typical for some areas of the French cities. In time, nobody wanted to live in such huge built structures. And the idea was to demolish them and build anew. And these would imply a lot of costs. And so our architects proposed a different approach. They said, well, we can refurbish, transform those buildings by adding something instead of approaching the problem with the idea we should build apartments with a smaller surface. They said, no, we should upgrade the existing building blocks with extended livable area. And so they covered the existing building with some sort of a skin of terrace, of closed terrace that actually double the surface of the livable space of the apartment. And this also gave the people living in these apartments a new sense of dignity and a new comfort for their life indoors. And Actually, it is a very successful intervention, and I very much like the idea. And now I will do something similar to the presentation my colleague has made before me. In 2007 and 2009, we had a research project called SLOs, that took into analysis some part of the city of Bucharest with some communist era built block of apartments. We analyzed the problems the population of these areas had. And we came to a similar idea that the life quality could be very much increased if some elements to these existing blocks. And those elements were some more or less glass house extensions for common spaces, common areas, a common planted terrace. And actually, this was, I think, a very interesting approach, because we said complex solutions cannot be addressed without integrated solutions, that problems have to be understood and dealt with on several levels from in an integrated multidisciplinary team. And that's why I asked my colleague how well they worked with the local administration, because we presented this project to the local administration in Bucharest, and all they did was to change the planted areas around the blocks by starting by cutting older trees, which was not a success at all. And actually, the whole intervention ended because the people living in that area opposed it in court. And so that's not a good example of how good ideas cannot be applied. This is a good example. On the other hand, I just made a selection of our present images of our presence in the solar decathlon competition. We start with the PRISPA here in 2012. And you can see how different the volumes and the ideas are. Each of and every one of these was well valued and praised. I think that each of them brings in interesting ideas. And I'm glad to say that in 2023, the competition will be held in Bucharest. So if you do have some projects, we might see you in Bucharest next year. Now I would like to bring in two extremes of green idea for houses, actually developed by people that are not architects. We know in architecture, we say there is vernacular architecture, the architecture that is made without an architect. People tend to find and build solutions to their own needs. And I brought here some examples of the extreme contexts. These are two houses shielded in a glass house, shielded from the harsh cold weather in the northern part of Europe, in Sweden and in Holland, in somewhere near Stockholm and in Rotterdam. And actually, this is quite an interesting example, because this glass house creates a very different, warmer climate inside it. And actually, these people are very happy to say that the air inside this glass structure is very warm, and they grow their own food, and they enjoy some sort of enclosed courtyard all year round. And so you say, well, that's an interesting idea, but what about the places where the climate? Well, I do have some examples for that as well. The famous earthships, houses that are developed for the desert areas in the United States. And I think there are also very interesting examples because they use the Adobe traditional techniques, as well as the idea of reclaimed building materials. Or usually these windows would be reclaimed, used, reused. And I think there are lots of interesting ideas. This, again, closed courtyard type spaces in which we have plants, in which we can grow our own food. And the whole atmosphere seems to be very, very pleasant. Smart solutions for the interior. To answer Mr. Lianu's question, smart means everything gets smarter around us. Every product, every object, the house itself is furnished with, on one hand, elements that would assess certain parameters. On the other hand, systems that would regulate those parameters via different technologies and via different programs. And all these technology is related to the human needs and is put to communicate with the user. And so there are a lot of interesting things that are proposed by these systems. They need a lot of a very complex process of integrating all these new technologies inside our homes. There are a lot of interesting things, but I think these complex connections, the interconnections and the effects of these developments are not yet very well studied. And I don't think we got to the point where these smart devices, you know, there are this idea of the Internet of objects, objects that discuss among them and start to work together. And I think this is a very complex new type of connection with the technological world. And maybe there are also some dangers in this. And when I talk to my students, I always like to make also references to films, literature, or animated or games. And I think we have two examples of cautionary tales about the possible negative effects of technology on humans. One example that I like a lot is the comedy film made in 1958 by Jacques Tati, Mon Oncle, in which there's a very funny satire about the modern architecture and all the technological wonders that it can provide. And the poor uncle is overwhelmed and put in very funny situations of all these moving parts and new technology involved. On the other hand, we all, I think, saw the Wall-E animated film, in which there are a lot of ethical problems that are explained. What about the Earth overwhelmed with waste, with garbage? What about the over technological comfort that would transform us into potato-like, very vulnerable, finally, creatures? So be prepared to think critically about every proposition that is made to you. That's a good advice for any user anywhere. And that's a very good advice for an architect that has to think a very complex environment. I think there's another interesting idea coming. What will be the relationship? How will we manage to balance the way we integrate the artificial virtual realities with the real life, day-to-day life, and the natural reality around us? And I think that's a good thinking theme on which to reflect as an architect. What is happening to climate change? What can we do to prevent further damages to the natural environment? How can we solve that by using education? And how can we make a more compelling demonstration of these negative evolutions by using new technologies? And I think a good example is a virtual reality series that is talking about climate change. I think virtual reality can be used and can become very useful in understanding how these processes will evolve. And also, it would be an easier way to test possible models of solving the problems. So what do? Do we choose tradition and slower pace transformation, or do we choose to abruptly change and choose revolution? Do we choose to use high technology or maintain the use of low technology? And here I present an example that combines the two of them very nice. Use of traditionally natural material bamboo with some modern composite and some high-tech materials. And I think that's a very interesting direction. Two other examples in the same idea. Some students in a Norwegian architecture school went to Africa, studied there the local building technologies and applied them in a modern approach for building a school. And on the right, there's obviously a modern house made with a traditional straw bale technology, applied with different and quite modern detailing. And I will continue with some examples of visionary creators. For example, Hundertwasser, who was actually a painter and who was interested in architecture, who proposed things like this. Some half sunken buildings over which there would be planted slopes, and how these elements would integrate within the Austrian alpine landscape or within the city of Vienna. This is an actual building, Hundertwasser building, with some very interesting ideas. For example, the facade has some pockets, as you can see here, that are built for trees to be growing there. And Hundertwasser said that trees have the same rights as the inhabitant of the buildings. A lot of interesting ideas that tend to be quite interesting even nowadays and find new applications. This is an example I found, but I don't have too much information. Maybe our American colleagues would give me some more details about this project, EcoFactor. It would be a sustainable resort to be developed in California on a previously used for mining terrain. I think we all have such problems in Germany, in Romania, in America. The land is being destroyed by heavy mining. What can we do about it? How can we regenerate the local biological elements, and how can we use it more responsibly? I think there's a very important, as we discussed before, there's very important this dimension of the strategy the politicians and the administrative of the bigger cities would apply. And I think bigger projects have this value of highlighting the way to do good practice and good solutions. And we have this Triangle Sustainable Business Park in Paris. I think bigger cities start to develop strategies to adapt these climate changes. For example, Berlin intends to become a sponge city. All these pavements and concrete buildings choke the earth. The rainwater is no longer absorbed naturally. There are a lot of problems with heat islands and so on and so forth. And so there are developed a lot of solutions for that. One of these is planting more on the terraces and in the city. And I didn't give here any image, but I know that in France, for example, there is a law that says any flat roof in a city has to be either planted or has to have photovoltaic panels, unless there would be a fine for that. On the other hand, I know there are several other solutions proposed. For example, painting streets and terraces in white, in bright white. So that would reflect light and the heat and not absorb it. I think myself, I would combine the two, and I would prefer to use a lot more greenery than paint. But who knows, maybe these solutions would be compared, and we would understand more about what's working and what's not. Large-scale projects could mean very large scale, such as this one that tends to diminish the deserted areas in Egypt by using very green solutions. I think these developing these solutions for Earth might be very valuable when we expand and leave Earth and go into space. I think recreating natural balanced environments on the surface of Mars, let's say, would be made possible by trying and learning by trial and error on such projects on Earth. I like, for example, the visions and the proposition this Vincent Calbo architect proposes. He has a lot of green insertion proposed for the city of Paris or for Brussels. For example, here you can recognize the Gothic gargoyle in the Notre Dame Cathedral and the typical apartment blocks in Paris that are overwhelmed with greenery. There's also the famous Venus project. Some utopian visionary architects or just thinkers and people that try to find solution and propose solutions. I think every one of these ideas brings something useful. For example, if the glaciers will continue to melt, we will have to find more solutions for living on the water. Smart city, well, that's a very large subject as well. They were thinking also by adaptable structures for the city. Adaptable meaning that you don't only change the conditions in which the traffic is managed, but also the shape of the street could adapt to the city needs. And I think adaptability is one key concept for that. This is a proposition, the nested skyscraper, a proposition for a high-rise building that would adapt to climate conditions. It has some membranes that would stay closer to the building in conditions like high winds, and that could expand when the conditions are different. I think this idea of adaptability is a very interesting direction. Another idea would be to, instead of being reactive, to become proactive in our interactions with the environment. For example, this is a water purifying skyscraper. Instead of putting used water into the sewage, we filter it and reuse it. And in the process, we make some greenery as well and purify the water. Another interesting example that was actually illustrated here with two buildings, one in Holland and one in France. The idea of doubling the facade with a second skin made of these panels, glass panels, inside glass boxes, inside of which there is water and there are algae, green algae that will be grown. And that would result in some shading for the facade, the creation of energy, and also the creation of some biomass for making biofuel. And these are actual buildings that are built and that work. Another idea would be, this is a proposition for an area in Boston. These prefabricated modules could be adapted and create different configurations according to the local spaces they would fit in. And there are a combination of ideas, a bioreactor using the growth of algae as in the other examples, as well as creating small spaces for people to rent, to develop small testing laboratories for whatever ideas they have. And I think this is a good example as well. Going back to the fact that we can start from one man's ideas, like Patrick Blanc, who invented the mur végétal, the green wall, who developed the technology to plant on a vertical surface the plants that usually grow on the horizontal soil. And the use of this was already made for the French Pavilion in Shanghai in 2010. And it's becoming more and more present in the interiors and also exterior facades of the buildings. This is on the left, famous buildings. Sorry. I have to pause for a while, just 4 minutes, sorry. My battery is low.
So if we let's if we don't not to wait, not to stay without any comments, please. If you think that you have some ideas or comments related to the professor's intervention, so let's think about that and to prepare yourself.
So, yeah, talking about sustainability, right? My battery was running low.
Okay.
So, Il Bosco Verticale, a famous building in Milan, and some new other ideas, Farm in the Sky, also a proposition made by Vincent Calbo. Some bio-inspired buildings that are already in use and quite successfully present in our cities. This was also a very nice example of understanding the natural elements and getting the inspiration for solving artificially a problem. This is about creating drinking water in a very hot environment in an African village. They studied the local village life and saw that all the villagers gathered underneath a very big tree in the city, in the village center. And they understood that this living organism provided shade and humidity condensed on the leaves of the tree. And so they developed this type of structure made out of local wood that would help with the humidity in the air during the night. The difference in temperature makes that in the morning the water in the air condensed on this structure, and then it's held by the gravity going down and collected here. And the same structure provides the shade that is needed for the local villagers. We can apply such bio-inspired solutions to very big scales, such as this new city cultural center in Taiwan. We can use this inspiration, for example, the lily pad leaf to create some floating cities. We structures already that help us understand the natural environments, and we use the famous Eden project. In each of these bubbles, there's an ecosystem enacted, and the whole structure of the cupola is inspired by natural raspberry structure. Talking about urban farming, the same Calbo proposes those flying structures that are actually flying farms that are here put on water. They absorb water and then they fly and arrive to urban areas and deliver their products. We also have a lot of interesting ideas for bio-inspired car concepts, cars that would grow from seed, cars that use materials imitating spider web. And I will conclude my presentation with the fact that we have to have a longer term vision. We have to prepare for the future here on Earth and outside Earth. And we'll see 3 more slides that I usually put at the end of my presentations. We more or less want to be happy in our own bubble, a smaller bubble. And this would lead to this, a lot of smaller bubbles that seem to be connected, but actually the idea is that we are isolated from each other. And this would be the alternative, a better alternative, I would say. Just recreate the diversity and the freedom that is still present in the natural environment and try to transform our man-made environment into such a freer, adaptable, diverse type of structure. That is all. Thank you.